Hello everyone, Astro here, and today I'm gonna be covering the Siegebow and all sorts of stuff about it. So I hope you enjoy. First of all, I'm gonna go over myself real quick. So my name's Astro. I'm in Blue Army. Been there since the start of Blue Army. When we originally split from Exertion. I was in Exertion because I was in the core group of Black Mamba, who joined Exertion when Black Mamba died and the Blame Alliance died. Um, kind of joined really late into release. I played Beta 3 in Envy, where I played Great Fire. I played a bit of Healer as well, and a bit of Arcane, a bit of everything really, because it was beta and the beta was ending and stuff. But yeah, that's enough about myself. So yeah, Blue Army is like the number one open world CVC guild right now, I would say. Uh, not too great in numbers, but the numbers we do pull are very effective. We outscale a lot of zergs merely with just quality players instead of bringing a huge amount of numbers. So I think that pretty much makes us the greatest ZVZ guild out there. All right, so let's start talking about the Siegebow. So first of all, we're gonna go over the spells and stuff you should be using, or I recommend using. So first of all, is the Knight Helmet. I feel the Knight Helmet is like the number one thing you should be using on Siegebow because it gives you the displacement immunity effect, and displacement immunity is super strong on Siegebow, as well as many other channeled E abilities in ZVZ. Because let's say you're going in, you channel your E, and let's say a tornado comes your way, knocks you up, and your E is cancelled. Now, if you have displacement immunity, you cannot get cancelled. Your E cannot get cancelled by knockups, which is very strong. Remember, you can still be stunned, you can still be silenced and all that, but you can't be knocked up. So that removes a huge amount of interruptibility potential to your E, which is your main source of damage. So I would definitely recommend Knight Helmet over anything else, Mercenary Hood, or whatever. So yeah, use Knight Helmet. No alternatives, I would say. Second, we're gonna go into the chest piece. I'm using Cleric Robe. I've always used Cleric Robe because I think it's the strongest in ZVZ. It's cloth, so it gives you a lot of damage. The Everlasting Spirit helps you get out of a lot of bad situations because it gives you invulnerability, and it allows you to move while you have invulnerability. Now, that last thing is actually super underrated. A lot of people prefer or are looking towards using alternatives to the Mage Robe. Like, for example, if we look at the robes, like, for example, the Cultist Robe. Because it gives you that sustain, because it gives you that health, but they forget you can't move while channeling that, and you can get interrupted out of it as well. You can't get interrupted out of this. You can get purged though, but you know that's a small hit to take really for the amount of invulnerability and movement this ability gives you. I prefer the Cleric Robe over anything else really. Also gives you a lot of damage. Third, and perhaps the most controversial of the entire build, is the boot slot. I've always gone with Hunter Shoes. When I first started playing Siegebow, I didn't play Hunter Shoes, but soon after I switched. So the thing with the Hunter Shoes is it gives you the rush ability, and the rush is super strong. It gives you the highest movement speed in the game on a boots ability for 3 seconds. Also increase your crowd control abilities, but you don't really care about that. Only thing you care about is that 120% movement speed increase for 3 seconds. Now that might not seem like a lot because it's 3 seconds compared to like a run, which increases about 60% for 7 seconds. The run will take you further, but the rush will give you a lower time interval between when you use it and when it runs out. So you're able to run you'll be able to cover a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, which happens to be very good for my kind of playstyle with the Siegebow. You can, of course, change this out but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's move on to the Siegebow. So on your queue, you want explosive bolt. Always, always, always. Auto fire is a channel, and channeled abilities are generally not very good in ZVZ if they're on Qs and Ws. So go with the explosive bolt. It's AoE as well. It's good damage, good range. You can poke a lot with it. On your W, this is a bit more controversial. I'm using caltrops, but it kind of depends on what you use. I'll cover that later. But yeah, I'm using caltrops. Places a trap, boom, and when you walk over it, only targets one person. But when one person walks over it, he takes a little bit of bleed damage and he gets slowed. The slow being the most important thing. The E is Vicious Barrage. You channel it, and then you have another channel. So 2 channels. And then while you have the second channel, you do AoE damage over big range, and you do a little bit of extra max health damage, or percentage max health damage. For passes, I'm using Furious because it's just extra damage. You can use Aggressive Caster to get your E channel out a bit quicker. It only increases the channel for the first channel, not the second one. So you won't do any damage quicker, but you'll get your first channel up a bit faster. I don't personally use it because sometimes I want to zone with my E, so I'll show you what that once my cooldown comes down. But this extra damage, it applies to your Qs, your Ws, and your E. It doesn't. Aggressive Caster only applies to your E, so I just prefer the extra damage. So let me just wait for the cooldown for my E real quick. I'll show you what I mean. This AoE you can see on the ground, it can be cancelled, and you will still have the full ability for you to use. So you can actually zone with this. The enemies will see this AoE being channeled, so you can do this and zone people out. Sometimes when I'm walking back or I'm kiting, I will sometimes do this, and people will spread because they don't want to get hit by the E, of course. You can use this very effectively to fake engages and to maneuver people, the enemy people. So yeah, that's why I don't use Aggressive Caster either, because sometimes you have Aggressive Caster, you do this accidentally casted because this first bit goes so fast. Alright, now we're gonna go over choices, my choice in spell and armor, and what you can possibly change. So as I said, always use Knight Helmet. Cleric Robe, I would always say you should always use Cleric Robe as well, as the meta is right now. Hunter Shoes, you can switch this out actually. You can use any sort of leather shoes you want or have highest spec in, and you can use Refreshing Sprint. It's like a rush, but a little bit slower, so I'll show you real quick. Also gives you a bit of cooldown reduction, which is nice. Let's say you're 4 seconds off of your E, and your shot caller calls an engage. You can just use this, get your cooldown, and E. But I would say I would personally prefer rush because I'm using 7-1 omelets, so I get that cooldown really fast anyways. So that little bit of 20% extra movement speed is really useful. You can also use a run on boots, which I don't really prefer, but you can use it. It gives you more movement options. It gives you more maneuverability. So let's say you're not that good in positioning, you don't really know where to stand in a ZVZ. Let's say you're new to Siegebow, you can use run on boots, so you have a bit more, your ability to get out is a bit better. But generally, I don't like it because when you channel your run or your movement ability and then E, by the time your E is over or even half channeled, you're already going to run out of your movement speed. And if you're channeling a full run in order to get where you need to E, then you're playing way too far back anyways, and you're going to be out of sync with the zerg. So I really don't like run, but Refreshing Sprint and rush are both fine in my opinion. I've seen people use different things with Siegebow on boots. I've seen people use cloth boots with blink. I've seen people use royal shoes or assassin shoes with dodge roll. Both I think are not good at all. Blink is like very short range, and it doesn't give you, like, you need to be already close to the enemy in order to blink in successfully and E on someone. So the rush gives a bit more maneuverability with that. The dodge roll, of course, I mean, if you're gonna go in, it's really bad because you don't need the defensive from the dodge roll at all to go in. You need it to go out, and if you're not rolling in, then you're gonna be really slow otherwise. To walk in, then dodge roll out, it's gonna be really slow. Unless you're already set up in a really good position. I would say you can use dodge roll in castles sometimes, because often you're already going to be in a pretty good position, so you're going to be able to have an extra defensive there. But generally, I would say using anything else that I talked about before is better. I haven't really seen this, but I'll just go over it anyways. But you might think, well, I might use a defenseless rush from the Royal Sandals, but anything really that's on a pretty low cooldown that increases your damage taken as a backline DPS is not good. So I would really not recommend it. Even giving up some defensives for more damage is sometimes not worth it at all. Like, let's say instead of using Cleric Robe, I were to switch to Instead of Cleric Robe, I would switch to Royal Robe. Of course, it's good. It gives you cast speed, it gives you damage, you're able to get your E off quicker, but you're losing off on one very important defensive, and it can get you killed pretty fast. So, moving on to alternatives in terms of abilities. So, on your Siegebow. As I've said before, your W is a bit controversial. You can use Noise Eraser, or some people use Thundershot. I would say use Caltrops in any big CVC, big being like 50 versus 50 and bigger than that. I would say use Caltrops, even 30 versus 30 and bigger. Use Caltrops because they're really good tools for zoning. Let's say you're standing here, the Zerg is like over there or whatever. You can just walk around here, play some Caltrops once in a while to kind of zone people off from like running at you. Tanks will run through this, but DPS certainly won't want to run through this because it gives them quite a long slow, which can get them caught. So use this as zoning, use this for kiting as well. So let's say you're running back, or let's say you see teammates running back, trying to run away from getting caught, you can walk back like this and shoot some Caltrops. Remember that Caltrops will stop you from mounting when you hit someone with it. Because they apply a bleed, so you can't mount for a little bit after you hit someone with a Caltrop. Now moving on to Noise Eraser. Noise Eraser is really, really good in like 20v20s and like 10v10 smaller skill fights, because you're much more able to hit the backline with them. So let's say you rush in, you get your full E channel off, like this. You can just W then. Sometimes you get a kill with it. If you don't get a kill with it, you can most of the time hit a backline clothy with the W, which will stop them from counter engaging or stop them from trying to get out a lot more. So I would say use this in smaller skill fights. The problem in bigger skill fights with Noise Eraser is that often you're just gonna hit a tank with it because there's so many tanks running around. So it's much less reliable. You can still use it. I've seen people use it, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Now, Thundershot, most people don't use this in ZVZ because, well, it's an armor debuff, but it's an armor pierce on one person. Why not run Caltrops or a Noise Eraser and just have a curse in your Zerg? So I would not recommend running Thundershot. It's also a channel. Channel Ws are not that great. Noise Eraser is also a channel, but it's a lot. I think it's a lot less long. Let me check that actually. Cast time 0.7. So Noise Eraser is a shorter channel, and it's a lot more effective than Thundershot, just because the silence is very good CC in a Zerg. Definitely for 5v5s and 10v10s, but you're not going to use Siegebow anyways. But definitely for crossbows in general, Thundershot is very, very good for that. So now we're just gonna move on a bit here to more general basics of playing Siegebow in a zerg. So let's say you've got this setup I have right now. Let's say you've got the exact abilities I have right now. What do you do in a zerg? Well, the main point, or the main problem I see with a lot of Siegebows in other zergs or fellow Siegebow players in my zergs that are not very experienced on playing Siegebow is they tend to play within the zerg itself a lot. So let's say this crossroads right here is the middle of your zerg. So your healers are standing back here, your tanks are standing up front. Yeah. Well, where I see a lot of Siegebow players play is they stand in the middle like here, and they walk around a bit like this, right? And when they're called to go in, they go straight up to the enemy zerg. Let's say at rush right now, rush in E. This is actually the worst way to play Siegebow, I think, because of two reasons. First of all, there's a much better way to play Siegebow, which I'll show you in a sec, which allows you to get a lot more damage off on backline. So one of the main roles of Siegebow is giving the backline a lot of pressure and AoE zoning. So as a Siegebow in the middle of your zerg, if you rush up and E, you're often going to hit the enemy front line more than you're going to hit the enemy backline. On top of that, if they have a quarterstaff player as a tank, he can just run up to you and stun you with his auto attacks or whatever. Or if you don't have Night Helm or you weren't Night Helmed, he can also just cartwheel you and completely screw up your E. So often you're going to hit tanks a lot more doing this, as well as you have a much larger chance of being interrupted, which is of course a main or a huge detriment to your damage. So instead of playing in the middle of zerg like this, you should instead be playing more like over here. So here, let's say the enemy zerg is like a U shape, right? So let's say they have tanks up front and they're kind of like bend around like the path I'm walking right here, right? Or moving my mouse. Like let's say it's kind of like a U shape, right? Standing here on the same line as your tanks, let's say your tanks are standing over here where my mouse is. You can stand on the same line as your tanks, but actually on the side. So this allows you to get much deeper into the enemy team or the enemy zerg than you would normally be able to. Because in the middle of your zerg, you should always be standing behind your tanks, because the enemy tanks and the enemy zerg is much closer to you. But here you're much further from the enemy zerg, but you're actually standing on the same line as your tanks. So you could actually just stand on the side here, rush in when your shot caller calls an engage, and get an E off. So notice two things here. If I go back, when I was actually in the middle of my zerg, you were standing further away from the enemy zerg because, of course, you're standing in the middle, and the enemy zerg is often like a slightly U-shaped zerg. You're going to be further away from the enemy backline, so that means that when you rush in, once I get my rush cooldown, one sec. When you rush in, often when you end your rush, you're going to be on top of the enemy front line, and then you're going to E, or like slightly in front. You're going to E, the clothies will just run away from you, and you might be interrupted. But when you're standing on the side of a zerg, you're actually technically much closer to the enemy backline than you are standing in the middle of your zerg without being out of position, because you're standing on the side. You're basically playing a flank role. So from here, if I pull off the full rush duration, you can notice that I'm making a slight turn while I'm rushing, and I get much deeper than I was from the middle of my zerg, which allows me to get a better channel off on the enemy clothies. Also, hitting the enemy clothies from a side instead of from in front. So by hitting them from here to there, instead of from here to there, kind of screws them over, because you have very little ways to run because your AoE of your E is so big, and often you want to time this with your front line, your Zerg's frontline stuns, so you can get a big channel like this off, and all the clothies inside here will be stunned and hit by your full duration of your E. So now you kind of know how to use your E and how to play Siegebow with your E. Kind of want to go over Qs and Ws. So I already said you want to use Ws for kiting if you're using caltrops, and I already said if you're using Noise Eraser, you want to kind of use it after you get your channel off, or you want to use it randomly to when you see Clothy's out of position or whatever. Your Qs though should mainly just be poke. So let's say you're playing on the flank here, the enemy front line is right there. You kind of want to walk forward for like a split second, like face forward, Q, walk back. You should never do this. Q and walk forwards. The second you see their front line right here and you Q them and you walk forwards, you can be screwed really hard because they might like run at you. So always Q, walk back. You should never Q and walk forwards unless you're completely rolling over someone. If you're completely rolling over someone, well, it doesn't really matter what you do because you're rolling over them, right? So generally you want to Q and walk back. What you can also do is Q and walk to the side, because this is a more like aggressive queuing poke style where like you're not that scared. You know they're not gonna run at you or whatever. Then you can Q and walk to the side like this. But if you're not sure what's gonna happen, if they can engage, if they want to engage, you can just Q, walk back, and just walk back forward, Q and walk back. Same with W's actually, like this. If you're purely poking to get better Qs off, you can W, wait till they walk into it, Q and walk back. See how I W, walk back, Q, walk back? That's actually a really good way to poke. But generally, your biggest damage is going to come from your E. Your Qs are literally just to put a little bit extra pressure. It might not seem significant, but when you have 20 people doing that at the same time, you know, you're going to do quite a lot of damage with it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to cover. If you guys have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask them in the comments section. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.